Welcome to Field Event Showcase. I am your host, AJ White, and today we are joined by the 2020 U.S. Indoor Pole Vault champion, Matt Ludwig. Thank you for being here, Matt.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Congrats on a great season and recent performance at the Doha Diamond League. Could you take us through the meet in Doha?
Certainly. It was hot, that's for one. Out in the desert in the Middle East, it's a unique environment. It's surprisingly more humid than I was expecting, but even with the sun down, it was pushing mid-90s with some humidity. So thankfully and purposefully, the meet was hosted after sundown at like 6 or 7 o'clock at night in Qatar. So it was not terrible, but it was definitely hot, and I had to stay very hydrated and well nourished for the meet. But it was a lot of fun. First Diamond League appearance for me. A little bit nerve-wracking, but also exciting to be competing alongside the likes of Mondo Duplantis, Sam Kendricks, and Renault, kind of like the big three in the sport of pole vault right now. So, and to finish just behind them in fourth place, respectively. So, really fun, cool experience, and I'm glad that I was able to take advantage of the opportunity to jump high and perform and earn, I think, future opportunities on the circuit. So, a nice sort of breakout performance, I think, and plenty more to come for sure.
Yeah, and it was one of those things. Just watching that competition, you were definitely in the mix. Sam was having a little bit of off day, and I mean, you were jumping well. Took you to your third attempt, I think, a couple times. But can you kind of talk a little bit more detail about the competition itself and how it kind of played out?
For sure, yeah. I thankfully started on two first attempts at 17.4 and 17.11 or 17.10. So that was a good way to start. And then I started having to make some pole transitions as I was getting a little more warmed up, jumping through my poles better. And so by the time I had gotten to 571, which was 18.10, 18.9, I was on probably my sixth or seventh pole in my bag out of 8 total poles. So I was jumping through a lot of poles that day, which is good. And I think the warm weather helped a lot. But I had to make my little adjustments along the way, and it wasn't a very clean or pretty technical performance. I was sort of just running fast and jumping well and getting on top of some big pulls. So I think I'm excited at the potential because I'm doing the hard work, which is putting all the energy into the game, and now I just got to get efficient and technically sound, and I'll get sort of free height out of it. But it was a good experience. I went second attempt at 18.4 and then third attempt at 18.9, and at the time, yeah, that put me up into fourth place. And then I actually had a great second attempt at 19.1. And if I'd have made that, I'd have finished overall in second behind Mondo based on countback. But unfortunately, it didn't work out. Didn't end up making it. And it was a very cool experience. Between Mondo looked clean and jumped his jumps, but it's been a long season for everybody. And I think we could see that sort of weighing in. People were starting to be pretty fatigued, pretty tired. The weather didn't help with that as much, and I think people were ready to shut their seasons down after this one.
Gotcha. How was it competing in Europe? I think you had 3 or 4 meets in Europe. How was this Europe trip as far as competing? Was this some of your better performances over in Europe? Starting to get comfortable with the traveling abroad?
I think I'm getting more comfortable with traveling, certainly. Unfortunately, on the trip to Europe, I did 3 meets, and all 3 were below my previous bests or my previous jumps on a former Europe trip that I had taken. So second trip, it's kind of my worst one so far, but that happens, and I need the experience. I need to keep getting used to traveling and everything. But I'm not dissatisfied. I had a lot of cool opportunities. I kept getting to know some of the athletes, some of the meet promoters, and I'm really just sort of building my network overseas. And through that, I think I've gotten my name out there, and I've gotten into some good competitions, and I think I'll continue to work through and get those opportunities. But Doha definitely boosted my confidence after the Europe trip that I had taken. I jumped really well in Innsbruck, Austria, which is where I started at something called the Golden Fly Series. And I first attempted all my heights from 5'10", 5'30", and 5'40". And then we actually got rained out. So I had to jump 5'10" in like a torrential downpour thunderstorm. And then we took about a 30-minute break for the rain to subside. And then after 2 heights, it picked back up in the storm again. And so we got rained out from that competition. But I was jumping well there, so I was disappointed, but I was excited to start on like a decent note, and I tied for winning the competition with clearing my heights, so that was good. And then took that to the Czech Republic, to Ostrava, and that was it's called a Continental Cup meet, and so it was like one of the larger competitions I've been in. And I was dealing with some inconsistencies on my side. My approach and my takeoff weren't too great, and I mean there was a little bit of weird winds, but nothing I shouldn't have been able to handle. Unfortunately, I had a bad series of jumps to start with. I think I came up short, and then I blew through, and then I came up short again. So it was kind of like the terrible trio for starting a competition, because I was playing the game trying to move standards and switch poles, and so I ended up no heighting in Ostrava, which is a tough way to get into the European stuff still. And then the third meet in Poznan in Poland, better performance. I cleared 2 or 3 heights there, jumped 552, which is 18.1 or so. Felt good, but was having still some trouble with some poles and building that consistency. And then in Doha, actually, which was a few weeks later, but I had to take a new series of poles that I'd never jumped on before in Qatar. And that was a new experience. But I was really happy with how they performed, and I was happy with how I did. And so I think because I didn't know how the poles were going to work, I had to over-exaggerate the good technique. And it really worked out.
So yeah, kind of that sounds like a little bit of a logistics thing there. So you were having to jump on new poles in Doha. Is that because like your poles got lost somewhere? I mean, I know traveling with as many like that setup has to be pretty tough. So, can you kind
Yeah,
of talk a little bit about the logistics of some of that? Pole vault's probably one of the hardest ones to travel with.
absolutely. Even going to the the airlines that do fly poles, it's not something that the attendants see very often, and so they look at it and they're like, "Are you sure that goes on the plane?" And I'm like, "Yes, that's why we fly with airlines like Southwest or United or any of their affiliates, because they do travel pole vault poles." So super thankful for that, and knock on wood, I've had a good experience with that so far. But we made the decision when traveling or when planning the Europe trip. I could get poles there pretty easily, but it was just dreadful to find any way to get them home. There were no airports within like an 8-hour drive of my last competition that had flights back to the States on airlines that would travel poles, or on planes that were large enough. And part of that is due to the pandemic, with really lowering the amount of flights traveling at once. But so we decided to leave the poles in Europe with a couple athletes who we work with, and then I had a second set at home. And ideally, the goal long term is to have a set permanently in Europe and in the States, so that I don't have to travel with them at all, and I can hopefully trust both series and jump well on them. And so that was my first experience with that, and I took this new series that I hadn't used over to Doha for that, and now that's what I'm training with.
Understood. So, like the same poles, just different, or were you on like completely new poles? And how big of a deal is it? Kind of the poles you're familiar with. How hard is that transition to picking up a new pole and like in a competition under a lot of pressure?
Mhm. It's an interesting challenge. They were the same length and the same flex, but the mandrel size, which is sort of the diameter of the pole, was different. And so the series that I'm comfortable with, that I've used for about 2 or 3 years now, have a fairly skinny mandrel. They're kind of small poles. I have nice small baby hands, and so feels comfortable in my hands trying to jump. And this new series is about 3 or 4 sizes larger, so now they're wide, and now I have a little bit of trouble like almost not getting my hand completely around it, which is a little more intimidating. If it was a smaller practice pole, I wouldn't have a problem, but given that they're my meet poles and they're kind of at the upper level of what I'm able to jump on, it was definitely intimidating at first, because I wasn't sure if I was going to make it in the pit or if I was going to get shot back or what kind of was going to happen. But they worked really well. If anything, actually, they felt a little bit soft once I started getting comfortable, which is good. And so I'm really comfortable with them now. And I think I finally grew past that bit of worry, forcing myself into that situation. But I'm comfortable. I think that's what it took, that little bit of pressure and that sort of urgency to be on my game and performing. And as I kind of mentioned before, it's like when there's a little bump in the road, sometimes I have to over-exaggerate the good technique to make sure that everything works out safely and correctly and technically sound. And Doha was an example of that.
Yeah, I think that's a good advice for pretty much all people competing in the field events is like when you are in those pressure situations, sometimes it's good just to focus on your cues and then let all the adrenaline stuff take over. So
Mhm.
definitely some good points there. So does it kind of build your confidence to have most of your best performances this year? Definitely outdoor, happening on foreign soil in these competitions. Are you starting to get a little bit more familiar with that? I was looking at your numbers. Like this was like a 19, like this year, that 590 you hit in Mexico was like a 19 centimeter outdoor best, I believe.
Mhm.
Kind of getting more comfortable with the outdoor setting and on foreign soil. Like, are you starting to feel a little bit more comfortable there?
I think so, truthfully, and that's going to be what's necessary to have a long-standing and successful career and accomplish what I'd like to. Because unfortunately, the states don't put as much excitement and emphasis on professional track and field outside of the Olympic Games compared to Europe and elsewhere in the world. And so that's where the opportunities are and the good competitions. And at this point, out of college now, the paychecks. And so getting comfortable traveling, competing is going to be a necessity. And I think I'm continuing to improve at that with each trip. And actually, I'm getting much more comfortable now. 8 or 10 hour flights and sitting in the airport for 5 or 6 hours at a time. I get to the meet and I get to the hotel or the facility and I put my shoes on and go jog around and stretch. And I just work my way through the things that I have to work through. And it just becomes a part of who I am now. Originally, it was very stressful. I was extremely tight. I was dehydrated. I didn't really know how to handle that traveling situation. And now it's just sort of, it's just a thing that part of the process. And so I think I'm integrating to that really well. But so getting used to foreign soil, certainly, and outdoors in general, I think I'm getting better at too. And I think that goes along with my comfort in my equipment, jumping on the poles that I am. Uh, I can get to a meet, and if there's bad wind or if there's a weird runway, we can sort those things out, and I can just go on a little bit of a different pole maybe than most days, and I can just make things work. Really happy with it though. Mexico City in particular, which is where that 590 was, it was about as perfect of a day as you could set up. We had this nice soft tailwind behind us, uh, gorgeous, like really nice runway. It was about 85, 90 degrees, no cloud in the sky. It's at altitude where we were jumping, so that when it comes to the pole vault, gives you a little bit of an advantage. Although after 15 or 20 jumps, you start to really feel it more. But it was really as perfect of a day as you could have imagined. And so I was, again, glad I took advantage of that opportunity and had a solid performance.
Yeah, and that's one thing I kind of wanted to touch on. So your indoor performances, from looking back the last couple years, have definitely been a lot more consistent. And you've hit a lot of your bigger marks indoors. Can you kind of talk a little bit? I know pole vault is probably the one that affects the most, the difference between indoor and outdoor, and like the weather and conditions and stuff. Can you talk about some of the challenges you've had trying to transition outdoors? And it sounds like you're starting to figure out a lot of those like if this happens, then I'm going to switch to this pole kind of scenarios and what works for you.
Mhm. Yeah, the weather is a big factor, but even outside of that, indoors, well, training at Akron, we have a really nice indoor facility, not as nice of an outdoor facility. So I'm training indoor almost exclusively while pole vaulting. At least it's on a flat track, and it's not a raised runway every day. But most indoor competitions as well are on raised runways or board runways. So they have that sort of bounce to them. They feel really good. You feel fast and tall. And then outdoors, it's a lot more jumping sort of in a stadium setting on a flat track at the edge of the track or something, or the D section of a track. And so those definitely feel like different environments and different settings to be jumping in. And so it's a little bit of a weird switch for me every year. And I mentioned tend to be a much better indoor jumper, much more consistent, and up until this year, a higher jumper indoors than outdoors. And I think the traveling and the experience to new places and jumping more on stadium flat tracks is really part of what fed into that success a bit more. And I'm just getting comfortable realizing that the sport is the same no matter where we're jumping for the most part. And as long as I execute and do things correctly, things should work out in favor for me. So I'm happy with it.
Yeah, that sounds great. It sounds like you're definitely figuring it out, and just in time too. I know the pandemic kind of threw a wrench into a lot of people's plans. It looked like you had a lot of momentum heading into the outdoor season before kind of the pandemic hit.
Mhm.
How did you have to adjust? And just training plans, adjust like did you always know you were going to be able to compete? or was that in question, especially after the Olympics kind of got postponed? So just kind of how'd you approach the pandemic in general?
Yeah, that was really tough, as it was on everyone. But my experience with it, I went for about a month, not really training anywhere. The way that things progressed and as rapidly as things shut down, uh, it was pretty easy and pretty quick to assume that there'd be no competitions for a while. So we actually just kind of put things down for a little while, for at least a couple weeks, maybe a month or so. And I did very, very limited training in general. We were also looking for a facility in the first place because everything was closed. And so went probably a month or so without traditional training. And then we were able to find a pole vault facility that I would be able to have access to and jump at with really no access to weights or a track for running. And so it was very limited. And again, well, what became tough was I was in great fitness and great form in March when I competed in Mexico City in the U.S. Championships. And then we slowed down for a little bit. And then we reached a point where we were under the impression that it wouldn't be likely I would compete again until this coming January, that all of the spring would be a wash. Nobody would compete, and I would have to wait to pick up to compete again until January. And so with that sort of mindset, we really stepped away from a lot of loading and a lot of hard work. And we said, okay, let's just jump twice a week. And that's going to be about it. Try to get some running, maybe a lift if possible. But with the limited access that we have and just the uncertainty in the air, we just have to pretty much do that. And so jumping twice a week was okay, but it was mostly short approach. And over time, I very noticeably lost a lot of my fitness. And so by the time that I picked up for a competition in May or June, I tried to come from my full approach, and it was just a hassle. It was difficult. It felt very long. I could tell that I wasn't in as good a shape as I needed to be to compete well. And so I had a string of really rough performances, and those helped me kind of kick me in the butt and realize I had a lot more work to do if I was going to be competing this year. And then once I kind of worked with my agent, and he said, hey, look, we have some opportunities overseas. I'll get you in them, and you'll have 3 or 4 meets overseas. If you think you can compete well and do well, it'd be good for you to get over here and get the experience and make the most of it. And so I was like, I was super nervous because I knew I wasn't in the best shape, sort of thing. And I was like, all right, well, let's do it. I'll tough it out. I'll bring good performances to the table and bring my best. And so I did about okay. I'd like to improve on some things, but as always, but as far as the pandemic, yeah, I mostly just got out of shape. And so I'm glad with how I brought it back, but it was a large challenge. And part of that was intentional to steer back because we didn't know what was going to be ahead. But hindsight now, seeing how quickly I got back into some competitions, it would have been nice to have kept in good form because actually too, I ran into a little bit of an injury for a couple weeks. Same kind of idea. I was going on that twice a week jumping and slowly losing a bit of fitness. And one day I was just in the middle of my approach and took a jump, and I kind of pulled my hamstring pretty hard. And I had to shut things down for a couple weeks because I wasn't as strong or as fit to be able to handle the jumping I was doing. So it was unfortunately not the best, but we're good now.
Yeah. So this meet, even more so, that last Diamond League meet in Doha, does that give you even more confidence, the fact that you were able to battle back so quickly and start having some pretty good performances at the Doha meet where you jumped 571, I believe?
Yep.
Does that kind of give you some confidence heading into next year, the Olympic year, being able to really try to get on the Olympic team and really kind of challenge for that spot?
Yeah, absolutely. Confidence in my performance, but really confidence in just sort of my personality and the way that I approach meets in general. I think that's all the traveling and the competing with the big shots in the sport. I look around at competitions and I'm like, these are all Olympians from across the world. These are former world champions, former world record holders, current world record holders, the American record holder, all the national record holders from these countries. And so these are star-studded fields where every person has jumped 19 feet and beyond. And so it's been a little bit of a learning curve, I suppose, to be in those types of competitions, because you have to respect everyone. Not that I sort of didn't do it before, but you're taking jumps and you have this bit of confidence, and then someone just comes and smashes the bar first attempt, and you're like, well, dang, I thought I had this position locked up. Apparently not. And so it's a good eye opener, and it's a good experience. It was a little different from college, and so most of the meets in college, I was sort of the top guy at a lot of my meets, so I was jumping by myself a lot and just building it that way. And then I get to something like the national championship where there's a lot of depth. There's really good jumpers from everywhere, and it's a challenge and a fight and a grinder of a competition to come out on top. And so putting myself into those situations and having to work through and battle against some people, it puts a lot more emphasis on making the bar versus missing it, because there's such a consequence for that. And the mentality that you have to show up with that level of athletes that you're competing against, and bring your A game and not sort of fold under pressure. And so that's been a challenge, but I've accepted it really well. And Doha was an example of just getting comfortable and jumping through and being a good jumper.
So looking forward now, do you kind of have any more meets on the schedule? Or are you already starting to plan on like what indoor is going to look like? I know indoors likely going to be kind of different with the NCAA system this year, and COVID still hanging around. And then what are your plans for the off season, and kind of what are you focused on heading into next year?
Yeah. So for meets this year, I think I've got 3 more competitions. It's going to be over 2 trips, and but I'm not going to prepare for them in the same way that I would for the meets that I've competed through now. And all I really mean by that is the meets up until now. Once I had access to more facilities and weight training and tracks to run, I got my kick in the butt from a couple poor performances. I really put my nose down and worked, and got in great shape, got ready to compete, and had a good string of meets. And now, because it's so late and we sort of reached the typical off season, we're going to take the opportunity to compete in October and November in a couple meets. But I'm just going to focus on building my foundation of fitness again, step away from pole vault specifically, or like technically, just for a little bit, and count that as kind of my rest from the sport. And then I'll take a couple jump days, head over to the meet, compete, bring it back home, and get back into training right where we left off. And so it's not typically how we'd approach training into a competition, but given the timing, that's just what we have to do in order to be ready for next summer or next spring when things matter more. And then as far as off season, not much. I'm volunteer assistant coaching at Akron, so I'm working with the collegians, helping coach them, and getting my training in before or after their training days mostly. So as I kind of mentioned, I'm stepping a little bit away from the pole vault specific stuff, but I'm hitting the weight room, I'm hitting the track, getting myself back in some good fitness. So no real off season. I took a week or two after, it took a couple days after Doha, but nothing crazy. And looking towards next summer, towards the Olympic trials, I think I have a good attitude getting ready for it. I have a good mindset. I'm excited to get there and compete with everybody. And it's going to be a heck of a 2 days to get through prelims, make the finals, and then compete with everybody in the finals. I think it will take a high bar. I think one of the highest bars to make the team in a while, given our depth in the U.S. right now with 11 or 12 athletes over this 580 standard just through February or March at the time. And so it's going to be a heck of a challenge and a good performance. But I think, again, with all the traveling that I've been doing and getting experience in these tougher competitions, I think that sort of experience is really going to show itself. And so I'm excited to put it on display.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for your time, Matt. Would you like to give a shout out to anyone, and where can people find you?
Sure. So to start, I can be found primarily on Instagram at Matt Ludwig _23. Pretty simple. And that's where it's more so a pole vault page than my personal page anyways, but that's where I can be found. And then as far as shout outs, as always, Dave Mackey and Darren Emer with Industrial Vault Club, they were gracious enough to have their facility open during the pandemic safely and then within guidelines so that I could train. And and that was extremely helpful. The University of Akron has been a great supporter. James Lafferty, who's the CEO for Fine Hygienics Holding, and they make this Fine Guard sports mask that I'm wearing. Very comfortable, breathable, keeps you safe. And they hosted a competition that they invited me in to be a part of. And so super gracious for that, for building the sport and really supporting the athletes through it.
Thank you for watching this FES check-in. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on future content. Let me know who you would like to be interviewed next in the comments section below. And as always, let's grow the sport together.